Hello. I'd like to talk about something today that's something that I've been dealing with recently. And it's something that you don't hear talked about very much, even in spiritual circles. It's a very deep process, and it's not something that's going to probably make sense to beginners. It's a very advanced topic. And so, with that said, let me try to talk about this. In Buddhism, there is the doctrine of anatma, or no self, and of course, it doesn't mean that there's no self in any sense. There's obviously a conventional self that functions and that is identifiable by ourselves and other people. But what the Buddhist doctrine is talking about is a real, independent self that can be identified and found under analysis or by introspection. And what we find when we go looking for this self contemplatively and directly is that it's unfindable. It's not something that can be found as an object inside, because it's always retreating behind every possible object in consciousness. Consciousness or awareness itself is strictly unobjectifiable. And this fact of not being able to find a self when we've been told very clearly by our parents and society that we do in fact have a self, and they've been at great pains to describe it to us and tell us how we are and how we aren't. And the assumption and the implicit assertion is that there's definitely an independently really existing self. But there's a very deep insecurity in our very deepest core, because there really isn't a self that can be objectified as independent and real. And this core insecurity is something that can gnaw at our very core. And I've experienced this quite a lot in my life. I think I was somehow born with an openness or an intuition to this level of ontological insecurity, or in Western philosophy and existentialism, sometimes referred to as the fear of nonbeing. And unbeknownst to most people, it is this very deep emptiness of a self, the void, which they are desperately trying to keep from becoming aware of. And it causes us to have this deep belief that there's something wrong with us. There's some there's some flaw there that we can't really, it's hard to identify, and so we, um, we fabricate all sorts of um, things to hang it on. Oh, I'm bad at this, or I'm not good at this, or I did this wrong, or I did that wrong, or I lack this quality, or I lack that quality. And of course, other human beings are helping us along because they're feeding into this. And so, uh, for most people, it's very, very strongly defended, and there are layers and layers and layers of um, content on top of that deep feeling of emptiness and ontological insecurity. Now, the Buddhist tradition teaches that the way to deal with this and the way to go beyond the suffering that it creates is to divest ourselves of all these layers that we've put on top of the basic emptiness and fear of the void or emptiness, and convert it back into what I'm going to call ontological guilt. The feeling that I really don't deserve to exist. Yeah, it was a mistake. God made a mistake. I really wasn't supposed to be here. And so, for me, I've ended up feeling like an alien in this world, like I wasn't really supposed to be here. And I was born to a mother who didn't actually want a child, and so it's verifiably true that she treated me as if I should not have existed. And this psychological dynamic was, however, not the real root cause of the feeling of not deserving to exist. It's this fact of non-objectifiability of in our core, the inability to grasp ourselves as something definite. This is where the real root of this feeling of lack and wrong comes from. And so, in the Buddhist tradition, we're taught to meditate and to penetrate back through all these more superficial layers that have been put on top of the original core wound, let's say. I'm going to call it a wound because I experienced it that way, even if that's not what it is truly in reality. And we just go into our core and do our best to access this root of emptiness. And it is the most painful thing that a human being can experience. When I've experienced it directly, It feels like falling into a bottomless abyss, but it's a painful abyss, and it's melting me down and sucking out my being. And it's just indescribable to anyone who hasn't experienced it. It could be like having all the flesh burned off your bones. And in order to actually come to terms with this, we have to be able to sit in this pain and bear it for as long as it takes for it to burn up this false sense of self that we were either born with or given during the socialization process. And it is the highest achievement of a human being to be able to sit with this core of emptiness and let it literally burn up and burn out this grasping for a self that doesn't actually exist.